Good evening, thanks for coming out. It's good to see that the fluoride in the water here isn't nailing everyone just yet. I can't drink tea in Birmingham because I can taste it's got something in it. I can't drink it in Devon either because it's got chlorine in it. So, you've got to filter the water, but got to get that fluoride out of your water here. Okay, well, tonight, what else is there to talk about? It's the solstice. So, from this point forward, sadly, the days get shorter. But I think somehow we're going to be even more active than perhaps we have been. So, just let me do a straw poll here, and, that I don't mind what the view is. I'm not going to argue with any individual on a point of view. I'm just going to present my thoughts on the issue that we're facing in a couple of days. But a straw poll, how many people here are planning on not voting? Okay. How many people are going to vote to remain in the EU? Okay, and so would it be fair to say that the rest of you are going to vote out?
No, undecided.
Okay, I've been giving some similar talks around the country for a little while now, and I guess that most people can work out that my basic preposition is that we should be out, although not necessarily for the same reasons other people think we should be out. But all around the country, when I speak to people, it does seem that there is a massive, an absolutely massive determination to get out of the EU. So it's going to be a real bummer when on Friday morning that it's announced that we're staying in.
We know.
And of course what's happened in the last few days is absolutely critical to this emotional swing. It doesn't have to hit or impact on the actual vote. It just has to create the thought in people's minds that there's been enough of a swing to be able to declare a Remain victory. And of course it'll be close, but it'll be done on postal votes. But I just want to share some observations with you because the status quo that we think will be the case if we stay in, or when we stay in, isn't going to be the case at all. It's not going to be the same. It's not going to be the same, more of the same. It's going to be very different for reasons that I will explain as we go through. But let's just have a quick look at the events of last week. I'm not going to dwell too long on them, but how many people have some concerns about the official narrative that's coming out about Joe Cox? God damn it, we've got a bunch of conspiracy theorists here tonight. Well, I think your suspicions are well founded. It's less than 1 week, of course. It's 5 days. And there are clearly some irregularities in the narrative. There are some contradictions. And there's a family that I haven't seen shed a tear yet. To see 5 members of a family all standing together and not one of them showing any sign of grief is just unthinkable. One I can imagine, one being strong, maybe 2 could be strong enough not to, collapse. But, I'm sure most of us have lost somebody close to us. And how many of you, on the day that you lost a close friend or a close relative, how many of you immediately went on social media and set up a GoFundMe campaign for your friend or relative's favourite charity? No? Okay, for anybody who's lost a partner, would you think that the right thing to do was to take your preschool children camping? Yeah, there are some things that just don't add up. I appreciate that people think differently, but there's some things here that don't add up. But then we've perhaps been given some insight into how these events are perpetrated. And you know, we don't have to look too far. How many people are familiar with Darren Brown? Yeah, Darren Brown over the last few years has done a couple of very interesting experiments. And there was 2 experiments that I'm going to reference tonight. One was where he managed to get 2 women to push who they thought was the boss of a charity off of the roof of a building without hypnosis. That was just through conditioning, without any hypnosis. And then there was a guy, this is a few years ago now, a guy who he hypnotised into assassinating Stephen Fry. Unfortunately, it was blanks. Sorry, Stephen, love you really. No, it was blanks, obviously, but the guy had no recollection afterwards of actually carrying out that assassination. And this is really very similar to some of the events that we've seen in the past. And I could, you know, list others, but I'm just going to focus on Sirhan, because for 40 years, nearly, now it's 40 years? More than 40 years. It's 40, nearly 50 years, isn't it? But he has always maintained that he has absolutely no recollection of carrying out the assassination of Senator Robert Kennedy. And this is a quote from the interview. He says, "Obviously I was there." He's seen the video footage. He said, "Obviously I was there, but I don't remember the exact moment I pulled the gun from my body or wherever I had it hidden, and I don't remember pulling the trigger or aiming it at any human being." Now last night I had Ole Dammergaard on Humanity versus Insanity with me. Ole Dammergaard is a Dane that spent most of his youth and adult life in Sweden, and he's done a lot of research into these events. And his initial motivation was the assassination of the Swedish Prime Minister Olof Palme in 1986, because at the time he realised that there were so many inconsistencies, it was something that needed to be looked at. He's written a 900-page book on the subject, so it's a very, very complex set of circumstances and subsequent events that he exposes in the book. But he was explaining that Sirhan did have a gun, and he did fire 1 shot. You can see that. But the 3 shots that killed Senator Robert Kennedy all came from back and to the right side of the head, from the rear to the right. So again, we've got inconsistencies between from Sirhan who was in front of him to the actual bullets that killed him. And apparently there was 13 shots fired. You can hear the shots clearly on the video footage. But Sirhan was carrying an 8-shot pistol. So it's clearly a tried and tested technique. But then Darren Brown brought it into the world of entertainment. So, you know, is Darren Brown perhaps either working for the government or is he a whistleblower? You know, one way or another, if he's not working for the government, then you have to ask why not, because they must be missing a trick, but they've probably got somebody of equal calibre if he's not. But this is from the Mail in January this year, and this was the headline, and there was a lot of, you know, discussion about it, and the moral and ethical grounds of what he was doing in conditioning people. And of course they were volunteers. They had all volunteered at some point in the past to participate in a Darren Brown experiment. They didn't know when that was going to happen, and so they had no idea that they were being conditioned and events were being choreographed to lead to this. And you can see this program online. You can watch it in full. The program actually focuses on the young 28-year-old male who actually resisted the programming and refused to participate in some of the more extreme requests that he was being asked to perform. But here we see this lady. Fortunately, she's facing away from the camera, but her name was Laura, and she was one of the 2 ladies who did literally take it to the nth degree and ended up pushing this guy off the building, believing in this perverse choreographed event that she was doing the right thing. So we know that, from what we see here, that it is possible to manipulate this, and he did it again with Stephen Fry. This is the moment that the young man, in this case, picks or pulls out the pistol, and this lady in the polka dot dress, she was actually one of the triggers. When it triggers, the psychological triggers, that because obviously Darren Brown had hypnotised him, he'd identified particular triggers, and when these triggers all came together, then that would lead him to perform this action. So here he is, sitting right up in the gods, taking aim and shooting at Stephen Fry on stage. Stephen Fry, of course, collapses. All of the audience are in on it. They've all been told what's going to occur, and they've all been told that once it does occur, just to sit quietly, remain calm, so that then obviously Darren Brown comes out and says, don't worry, everything's okay, Stephen's all right, he's in on what's occurred here, and then Stephen Fry stands up and just carries on with the performance. And the young man, by this time, has had the weapon taken from him, and he's sitting down and he watches the rest of the show. And then after the show, he's taken into the back room of the theatre with Stephen Fry. He has no idea why he's going into the room. He's responding to this invitation from Darren Brown. Darren Brown asks him, if he remembers what has occurred during the course of the evening. He has no recollection whatsoever. And as he's watching the video of himself taking the weapon, aiming at Stephen Fry, shooting Stephen Fry collapsing on the stage, obviously you can see Stephen Fry's alive and well, but he had no recollection of that entire sequence of events. So here we have two examples presented as entertainment, one purely through conditioning and one through hypnosis. Now, there are other methods, and one of the common denominators in a lot of the subjects is that they've all had some kind of psychological disturbance which has led to a course of pharmaceutical treatment, SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, antidepressants. These are seriously mind-altering drugs. There's a database online. Just remember, SSRI database. And it's a database that's been compiled by medical professionals who have, over the years, had increasing concern about the effects of these mind-altering drugs. And if you look at any high school shooting event in the US, or any event similar, then the SSRIs are a common denominator. Of course, there are other effects like self-harming, homicide, obviously suicide, and this database, which lists the drug, it lists the incident, and it has most of them actually made it into the mainstream media. So most of the candidates that are chosen, not in this case of course, most of the candidates that are chosen to be effectively the Manchurian candidate, the assassin that is programmed to conduct the event, they have been through a course of these psychoactive drugs. There's also a natural substance that has a very similar effect. It tends to be a little bit more short-term, but it's called scopolamine, devil's breath. And if you search for devil's breath online, you'll find I think it's Vice News did a documentary. They went to Colombia, because this drug is indigenous to Colombia, and it's used by the Colombians, the crooks and the prostitutes, because this is a naturally occurring substance, and basically if you can literally waft a handkerchief across somebody's nose, and if the scopolamine is on the handkerchief and they breathe in at that time, then almost instantaneously that subject will completely subjugate themselves to the person that's administered the drug. And in the documentary, you'll see people literally going to the bank and emptying their bank accounts. And there's another one of a video of a guy who is literally helping the person that administered the drug to him empty his apartment of everything. And they have no recollection. When they come down, when they come off of this substance, they have absolutely no recollection of what they've done. So, obviously, it's clear, the evidence is clear for all to see, that there are multiple techniques that can be applied to actually get people, in this case, normal a young man and then the women. By the way, for hypnosis, it's much more difficult to hypnotise somebody over 40 than it is somebody under 40. It's not impossible, but it's much more difficult. And that's why if you go to a live show of Darren Brown's, where he's doing any hypnosis or any other hypnotist, if they bring people up on stage, you watch, generally the people they work with will be under 40. I'm not going to explain tonight why that is, but that generally they're easier to work with. So the event with Joe Cox wasn't really a surprise. And in fact, I discussed this possibility in 2 previous episodes of Humanity vs. Insanity. In episode 67, which I broadcast in March, where the episode was entitled Joining the Terror Dots. And then on April the 19th, I did an episode with Zen Gardner, where we were looking at the significance of April 1920, the Day of Sacrifice by Fire. It just so happens that's the day the BP Deepwater Horizon occurred in 2010. And in the newsletter that I sent out on April the 20th, the final paragraph of the newsletter, I stated that in the weeks leading up to the EU referendum in the UK, if it's going against the establishment preferred outcome, then we can expect to see some kind of force flag type event. It's not rocket science. I simply have read the history. And this is the lady that I was effectively thinking of when I made that observation. This is a Swedish MP. She was the foreign minister in Sweden in 2003. She was in her early 40s, 2 young children. And she was campaigning for Sweden to join the euro. So this was a referendum that was going to be held in September of 2003. And the referendum was Sweden going to join the Eurozone? In other words, was it going to ditch the krona and embrace the euro, or was it going to remain with the krona? Now, interestingly, obviously the establishment wanted Sweden to ditch the krona. And this lady, she was assassinated, or she was attacked on September the 10th of 2003, and she died on September the 11th, 2003. 4 days before the referendum was due to be held. Now, interestingly, the vote didn't go the way the establishment wanted. And I guess that they were arrogant enough in their belief that this was going to be sufficient to get the sympathy vote and get people to swing towards voting for Sweden to go into the Eurozone. But of course they didn't. And so consequently Sweden still has the krona to this day. Now, one of the reasons that I think she was a target, or selected as a target, was because she was also very outspoken against a certain Middle Eastern country. And as we know, to be outspoken, whether it's a nation state or an individual, to be outspoken against Israel is a high-risk occupation. And by the way, I mean, one of the things that I was talking about in that Humanity versus Insanity episode 67, Joining the Terror Dots, I was looking at the events that had led up to Fukushima, to the E. coli outbreak in Germany later that same year, and also the Norwegian massacre. And there are some common denominators with all those events which don't make it into the mainstream media. So the scripts are there for all to see. You just got to make the effort to read them sometime. Well, it's interesting again. Robert Kennedy's assassin was called Sirhan Sirhan. Anna Lynn's assassin was Mikhail Mikhailovich. And basically, he has changed his story a number of times. And in fact, he basically denied, I think, that he was responsible for it at all, for something like about 7 or 8 years. And here was the article. This is from Expressen, which is a Swedish newspaper. So the 32-year-old Mihailovich admitted in an extensive interview with the Expressen newspaper on Sunday that he had not planned the assassination, but did it on impulse. After seeing the foreign minister outside the department store in Stockholm, he said he followed around several stories of the shop on September the 10th before the fatal stabbing incident which rocked society and changed Swedish politics. High on the hypnotic drug flunitrazepam. At the time, Mihailovich told how he tracked down Lynn and eventually caught up with her and stabbed her at a Philippa K concession. So here we've got a lot of the common denominators again already. So this is him giving his first interview on the subject some 8 years later, having previously denied that he had actually carried out the event. But he went on to say, "I just went up, took out the knife, and it happened there. It happened so fast. I remember that the atmosphere was chaotic, very crowded, and someone yelled, 'Catch him.' I remember there was a lot of shouting, but despite the attack happening in a crowded shop in broad daylight, Mihailovich managed to flee the scene, much to his surprise." Well, probably he was given a bit of help. Or people around there were in on it. Now, why is he revealing this 8 years later? Well, when Darren Brown had hypnotised the young man to assassinate Stephen Fry, it wasn't until Darren Brown effectively brought the memories back into his head that he had any recollection of what he'd done. But once Darren Brown had initiated the procedure to allow the memories to come back into the conscious mind, then the young man said he did actually remember taking out the gun. But if Darren Brown hadn't done that, then he would have been oblivious, probably, until some other traumatic event had occurred, and then it might have flooded back in. So maybe something similar happened here. Where maybe the memories were brought back so that after 8 years he could actually admit to the crime, even though, as we understand consciousness, he wasn't guilty. Yes, physically he was guilty. Physically. But was he actually present? Was the true self present? Then no. But the reason that the people who carry out these kind of, or manage and choreograph these kind of events, the reason that they always select people that have psychological issues in one way, shape or form is that they are susceptible to this, because hypnotists know very well that even under hypnosis you cannot get an individual to do something that they would not do under any circumstances in their full waking consciousness. And for people that are psychologically challenged and have been subjected to courses of these pernicious pharmaceuticals, apparently that's not true. Apparently you can pretty much get them to do whatever it is that you condition or hypnotise them to do. So of course in this country, a week ago, unfortunately, I made the observation on Tuesday to the friends that I was staying with. I said, you know what, the next few days are going to be very high risk for the high profile campaigners. And the reason I made that statement was because of this. The front page of The Sun on Tuesday of last week, exactly 1 week ago today. And inside they had a full double page poster which they were encouraging people to put in the windows of their houses and go, "Believe in Britain." Now, why did I think, when I saw that on Tuesday morning, that we were going into this high-risk period? Well, the Sun has never lost an election. Whatever party the Sun throws its weight behind on election morning, that party comes through victorious. Now, the Sun has a print run of around about 3 million copies, but it is allegedly read, and I'm going to use that term very loosely, it's allegedly read by some 11 million people. So that's about 20% or so of the population, the aware population. The classic, of course, with the Sun winning an election, like I said, they haven't lost an election at all, but the classic was in 1992, when everyone in the country was of the opinion that Neil Kinnock was going to win that election and was going to be the next Prime Minister, because John Major, who'd taken over from Margaret Thatcher, had made such a real pig's ear of it. I mean, he was vilified on things like Spitting Image, where he was depicted as the grey man. And basically that's how he was seen by the general public, because that's how people are conditioned. But the Sun, on election morning in 1992, ran the headline, "Would the last person in Britain please turn out the lights?" And it had a cartoon caricature of Kinnock, and his head was a light bulb. And so from almost a dead cert victory for Labour in 1992, the Sun, because of that headline, managed to get John Major re-elected. That's the power of the Murdoch press. Trevor Kavanagh, who's the political editor of the Sun, is an Australian, and he's the most powerful political editor in this country. And there's an anecdote, a Fleet Street anecdote, that when Rupert Murdoch bought the Times, he offered Trevor Kavanagh the opportunity to move from the Sun to the Times. And Kavanagh said, "Are you joking?" He said, "Are you serious?" He said, "If I write in the Times, I'm going to have to write, a great screed of in-depth analysis, and I'm going to reach about 250,000 people. In the Sun, I can do a quick couple of paragraphs and get it out to 11 million people." He said, no, it's a no-brainer. I'm going to stay with the Sun, and he's been with the Sun for 25 years plus or so. So we had this on the Tuesday, and then on the Wednesday, Switzerland, although it had been mooted back in March, Switzerland finally formally announced that it was going to withdraw its nearly, 24 years. For 24 years, Sweden had had an application in to join the EU. In March of this year, their parliament basically said, "You know what, we're thinking of just sort of letting you know that we're not interested." Well, finally on Wednesday, the Swiss parliament formalised the decision that they were going to withdraw their interest from joining the EU. So basically going the same way as Iceland, because Iceland, of course, had already made that statement. So now the establishment is in a world of hurt, because it's got the Murdoch press, the Sun. The Times is also a Murdoch paper, but the Times is Remain. The Sun leave. Classic, this is how they play society. The manipulation, play both sides, But now the establishment had a problem. The Sun never lost an election, blatantly saying leave, and the Swiss Parliament announcing that they were withdrawing their application. So, I hate to say it, but what happened then in the next 24 hours, although it wasn't necessarily inevitable it was going to happen in that period, but when it did, I must confess that I wasn't exactly shocked. And of course, sadly, this was the target, Joe Cox, almost identical profile to Anna Lindh in Sweden. Difference being Anna Lindh was an experienced politician. She isn't. She only came into Parliament at the last election, last May. But she made quite a name for herself. Number one, as a very vocal critic of Israel. But there's something not right anyway, because while she was criticising Israel, she was advocating raising money and garnering support for the White Helmets, which is an NGO organisation which is anti-Assad. And the White Helmets, it basically is a government organisation, not a non-government organisation, it's a government organisation. It's like an official wing of Al-Qaeda. And you're going to hear more about that in the coming days. But why did they select her? Young mother, 2 young children. Mixed reports as to how popular she was in her constituency, but that doesn't really matter because you can still spin that however you want. Interestingly, the husband, Brendan, is not exactly whiter than white. Of course, he left the charity that, I don't think he was quite the head of the charity, I think he was head of strategy with the charity, but he and the head of the charity both left the charity last November. He left reportedly with a £160,000 payoff, and the reason he left was because there were allegations made about inappropriate behaviour. Now there was no inquiry because he left, so it was all swept under the carpet. They both worked with Gordon Brown as advisors to Gordon Brown in the run-up to the 2010 election. Like I said, it's 5 days on, a lot of things are still unfolding. But this is the individual that allegedly and reportedly carried out that event. Yet, the video footage, which the media had shown and reported was this man being arrested, actually wasn't him. It was the guy, Bernard Kenny, I think his name was, Bernard Kenny, who apparently had actually tried to help Joe Cox and actually tried to help get Tommy Mayer off of Joe Cox. But he walked away. Now, this doesn't make sense either, because if you've just seen a crime of that order of magnitude and you have tried to help, then unless you're actually chasing the guy, you're going to hang around. You're going to stick around and you're obviously going to want to talk to the emergency services. That should be your natural reaction. But Bernard Kenny was tracked to a location some distance away, and that was where he was apprehended by 2 police officers, and there's some video footage. It's on various of the media websites, the Mail and the Mirror certainly have it up on their websites, and it shows the 2 police officers holding this guy to the ground. They've handcuffed him, and they're holding him on the ground until about another 5 vehicles of armed police arrive. Now that, allegedly, was this guy Bernard Kenny. Yet it transpires that Bernard Kenny died in 2013. And it's the same backstory. The Bernard Kenny that died in 2013 was a hero at a pit disaster in 1975. And that's the backstory that they were putting out about Bernard Kenny, the guy that now the media is calling to give him an MBE because he stepped in and helped out. Yet there is an obituary of Bernard Kenny in the local papers from 2013 with exactly the same backstory. So I don't know what the truth is. This is still early days. But what I do know is that it's a classic cock-up. And the British actually doesn't have as much experience as the Americans. The Americans seem to be able to get away with it with almost impunity. But in this country, we do have national media. In the US, there's really no national media. It's all very compartmentalised. But here we do have national media, and when something does break, we can get out fairly quickly. And also through our social media, we can get stuff out fairly quickly. So, because of the inconsistencies that have come to light so far, then there are an increasing number of people who are looking at this. And I think this is going to unravel, but unfortunately it's not going to unravel in time for the referendum. So, this is a classic example of emotional manipulation. And I have to say that the guys who are writing the scripts and choreographing this know very well what they're doing. They know that there's a number of us who know that they're manipulating this. That we know that the story doesn't stack up. But their attitude is this: we don't care. We don't care. Because there's not enough of you to get the traction, and if it does come out, we'll just deny it. And we'll just make up another story, and we'll just keep making up stories until it just goes away. Or it's no longer relevant. It's like the London bombings, you know, remember that? The classic hoarding on the side of the bus at Tavistock Square. Outright terror, bold and brilliant. I mean, they were telling us. And here we are, 11 years later, almost to the day. And, there's a significant chunk of the population who know that the events of 7/7 were nothing like what was presented in the mainstream media. In fact, there is more evidence to support the hypothesis that the 3 young men were assassinated at Canary Wharf that morning than there is that they got anywhere near the tubes. And if you want to see that, there's an academic paper written by Professor Rory Ridley-Duff from Sheffield Hallam University, and you can find his paper online. Unfortunately, it's sort of tucked away, but you can find it. You've got to know what you're looking for, but you can find it. But in writing that paper, it nearly cost him his job. And the title of the paper is a very snappy "What Really Happened at Canary Wharf on the morning of July 7th, 2005. But nonetheless, it's a really good analysis, and like I said, there is more empirical evidence that these 3 young men were assassinated at Canary Wharf that morning than there is to link them to the tube trains. Yet, the vast majority of people, because they're so well conditioned, still fall for the official narrative every single time. Just to show you the impact, Zero Hedge is a mainstream financial website. It's a very well-respected website. And yesterday morning, this appeared on their website. It said, "There is disturbing opinion circulating about Jo Cox and that she may have been assassinated to prevent a Brexit vote. Many are starting to believe there is a conspiracy plot connecting the dots to ensure a sympathy vote to remain within the EU. People are pointing to the familiar tool of assassination often used to achieve political agendas." Now, I would say that the journalist writing that knows exactly what occurred, or what didn't occur rather, but of course he's writing it for a mainstream website, so he's got to be very careful with the terminology. But let's have a look at what happened to... This is what happened to the British currency versus the dollar at the moment that she was assassinated. Took a massive spike because the pound has been falling against the dollar on the concerns that the vote would be for exiting the EU. Now, because of this, the markets know the degree of emotional manipulation that will be achieved by this event, and so the markets are now showing that they've got confidence in remaining in the EU. So let's take a look at what it is that we're getting into, because I'm hearing a lot of people justify, say, yeah, but we've got to stay in the EU because that's what's going to protect our employment legislation, that's what's going to protect our NHS, that's what's going to protect our social services. Really? Really? Well, we're in the EU. We've been in the EU since Ted Heath lied to the people. By the way, people think we had a referendum to decide whether or not we went into the EU. We didn't. Right, the decision was taken by Parliament in 1972. And basically in 1972 with the European Communities Act, then we were in. It was only after Ted Heath was kicked out of office after the miners' strike, first miners' strike in '74, and Harold Wilson came into office, that Harold Wilson set up the referendum. And of course the referendum, you know what, I'm going to put my hand up and tell you, because I was 18 at the time. I was 18 in a few months, and it was the first time that I'd had the opportunity to vote. And of course we were totally reliant on what the media told us. You know, there was no alternative media. And I fell for it hook, line and sinker. So I hate to tell you this, but in 1975 I voted to stay in, well, we thought it was joining, but of course that was the other lie, to stay in the, what then was the European Economic Community. You know, even though it was well known, and there's a great speech online from Peter Shaw, who's a Conservative politician, that he made prior to that referendum, where he spells out that this isn't about economics, it's about political union. But the people of the country voted to stay in, or go in as we thought, on the basis that it was presented as an economic union. So those were the first lies, and basically the lies have been perpetrated, you know, for the last 44 years now. But, yeah, straw poll, I mean, how many people here are actually proud to be British right now?
Well, I'm not as proud as I was.
Okay, well, that's good, that's a good sign. What about half a dozen? That's about half a dozen more than when I've asked the question in a lot of other places. But let's take...
Proud to be English?
Say again? Proud to be English. Okay, there's another one, absolutely. You know, there's nothing wrong with, whatsoever, with indigenous identity. You know, and yet that is one of the things that's being presented as xenophobic. You must be a racist. And it's outrageous. But, I mean, let's take a look at Britain in the EU for 44 years. Anyone recognise that? And that's not my front door. You recognise it wasn't too far away, well, just a few miles up the M6. This is the front door and the subsequent boarding up of this lady's property. This is May Appleton, an 82-year-old who lived with her 3 sons. And another example of Britain's economy in the EU. 3 sons in their 50s and 60s living at home because they couldn't sustain themselves in their own accommodation. And they were evicted because they had a hoarding problem. Now, I do have to say that having seen the photographs of the inside the house, they did have a lot of shit. Really. Oh, I mean, you know, you literally had to walk around the house like this to get through these piles of stuff, magazine and everything else. So there was a problem. No doubt about that whatsoever. But the way in which the privatised social housing company dealt with it was to evict them. Send them a couple of letters, and if they don't actually get rid of this stuff that they've accumulated probably over many, many years, well, clearly many, many years, evict them. So here she is. Not exactly a picture of health, is she? 82 years of age. So this is the Weaver Vale Housing Trust, and this is one of the reasons, by the way, that social services and social housing is being privatised. It's part of the EU treaties and subsequent directives that all nationalised and state-owned and public-owned services are privatised. And of course we're a long way down the road on that. Well, we've been in for 44 years, so you'd expect that to be the case. So that's what's happened with the railways, with the buses, with the post office, and of course what's in the process of happening with the NHS and with social housing. And one big advantage with these companies or local authorities privatising is that they are not subject to the Freedom of Information Act. And actually Tony Blair, when he introduced the Freedom of Information Act actually did it not because he wanted greater transparency, but he did it to incentivise local authorities and government departments to accelerate the privatisation process. Because once you privatise it, you don't have to reveal your dirty laundry when you get a freedom of information request. Freedom of information requests only apply to public bodies. So this, along with most other social housing around the country, has been privatised and is the Weaver Vale Housing Trust. This is the lady who took the decision, Judith Burbidge, Director of Neighbourhoods. And I'm sure you've probably noticed that, you know, one of the other things that's happened over the last 40 years or so is that common sense just seems to have evaporated. And anyone today who is capable of independent thought is unemployable. And I'm not going to ask you to acknowledge this by putting your hand up, but unfortunately today, and a police officer actually told me this, because I know this guy quite well, and he's not a police officer, but he is a police officer, you know what I'm saying? And I said, Phil, how do you manage to get through the day? Now, he makes sure that he's just on administrative duties, because he just can't hack it doing anything else. I said, how do you get through the day? He said, Ian, it's real easy. He said, in the morning, I stick my brain in the locker, and I'll pick it up on the way out in the evening. And I said, you sad git. I said, that is so sad. He said, I know. He said, I know. But he said, it's 45,000 a year. And all I've got to do is stick my brain in the locker for 8 hours a day. And do this and this, you know, when stuff's going on around me that I don't agree with. This is how the establishment are able to do shit like this. Because they don't do it themselves. They get us to do it. You know, through the conditioning. So anyway, the good news is that there was massive outcry, not just in the local area, but nationally. And the good news is that by the following Tuesday, they were back in their house. So, yeah, it wasn't common sense that prevailed, it was pressure. Pressure on the local authority, who in turn put pressure on the housing trust. Obviously they did clear the house, it was a little bit, there was a little bit more space in there when they went back in on the Tuesday. But nonetheless, you know, how absurd is this that you have to resort to an eviction of an 82-year-old to be able to deal with a problem? And this is just but one example. Here's another one. 44 years. 44 years in the EU. But the EU apparently has nothing to do with this. The EU has nothing at all to do with this policy and philosophy that unless you are able-bodied and able to contribute directly to the corporatocracy by working 80 hours a week, then you're a useless eater, in the words of Henry Kissinger. So, you know, what we have here today is a situation where basically if you can't work, then the state wants you dead. And just on the way here, I was actually sent a transcript of a conversation between somebody in the benefits office and somebody who is seriously ill, terminally ill, and because they have to go through the tests to justify whether or not they're entitled to benefits, and the person said, so can you give me a date when you expect to die? And the person said, are you having a laugh? And said, no, I've got, look, it says on the form here, I've got to approximate date of death. This is the mentality. I mean, consider the mentality of the person that even designed the form in the first place. But then the conditioning of the people on the front desk, you do that. I mean, I readily acknowledge I am unemployable. Not that I'm going to be looking for employment anytime soon, but I am completely unemployable. Because if somebody gave that to me, I went, you what? You know where you can say that? You are joking. And obviously, I would have kicked off and tried to get it changed. But this is the situation. So, you know, we have people that are sanctioned on benefits for the slightest transgression. like missing 2 appointments apparently. You miss 2 appointments in 12 months, and that's it, your benefits are sanctioned. And I know of one particular case. This is a young single mother, 2 teenage children. She missed 2 appointments, primarily because she was chasing around after her teenage daughter, and she was sanctioned. So she was sanctioned for nearly 6 months. No benefits for 6 months. And then one day she got a letter through the door advising her that she was being summoned to court for benefit fraud. So she goes down to the benefits office. Says, what's all this about? How can I possibly be summoned for benefit fraud when I have been sanctioned for the last 6 months? And do you know what the response was? Well, you're still alive. If you haven't had any income for 6 months, how have you been living? So you must have some other source of income which you're not declaring. Now, of course, what was happening was that her family were supporting her and giving her food and helping out where they could until the problem was resolved. Anyway, she had to go to court. She literally had to go to court. Now, to be fair, although I've had my run-ins with the judiciary recently, in London, never take on the judiciary in London. You've got no chance. Outside, though, to be fair, outside, the judiciary do still seem to be doing the right thing more often than not. And she wasn't the only one to be in court that day. There was a whole bunch of people who had received similar letters. They'd been sanctioned, and they were getting being charged with benefit fraud. And the judge threw all of the cases out, and then ripped into the prosecutor, saying basically, what is this all about? But this is the mentality of this country, and we've been in the EU for 44 years. So tell me again how staying in is going to change that? No, it's going to get worse. Right, because the whole process has already been privatised. It used to be Atos. Of course, that wasn't their full name. The full name was Don't Give. Because they didn't do either. Now it's Maximus. Maximus. Actually, it should be Minimus. Because that's what they're doing. And do you know what? The people on the front of house in the benefits offices, they are incentivised. They get bonuses for how much they can sanction people.
Can that be proved, or is it a suspicion?
Say again?
Can that be proved, or is it an intelligent deduction?
No, it's proven. Absolutely. I mean, they've openly admitted it. And it's like, that's what we do. We're there to provide a service on behalf of the government, and that service is to dish out the minimum amount of money possible.
Ian, can I just say something quickly? I'm aware that there's been a massive growth in food banks. That never really occurred to me, but fits in very much with what you're saying about the sanction of benefits.
Well, and this you've heard of Cameron's Big Society? Yeah? Well, this is all part of it, which is like, let's make the local communities responsible for, their wasters. The whole ethos, the whole economic ethos that is being presented is basically one of absolute draconian corporatocracy. In other words, unless you are making a direct contribution, then you're a waste of space and a waste of money and a waste of oxygen. And that's not the attitude just of the UK government, that's the attitude throughout the EU. So here we are. "44 years of lies." Yeah, and paedophilia, probably more than 44 years of that. But, and now we've got this division. And this is a generalisation, but it does seem to be. And I think it was pretty much the same in 75. Although there's less an excuse today because of the social media and because of the availability of information and accessibility of that information, but it's still a generalisation that it is the older generation that want to get out and the younger generation that want to get in. But let me tell you, the younger generation have no idea what they're signing themselves up for here, unless they are able to get on the corporate payroll. And of course, you know, this whole system works on the basis that the majority will be on the corporate payroll, the majority will be able to have decent lifestyles. But, you know, although I've enjoyed and benefited from the corporatocracy over the course of my working life, at no point did I ever acknowledge that we didn't have a responsibility for those less fortunate. You know, that's what society is all about. You know, if you've got family members that come on hard times, like this lady I was talking about with the 2 teenage kids when she was sanctioned, you know, the family rally around to support. Or the community rally around to support.
They believe in breaking up the family, don't they?
They're breaking up the family, exactly. Breaking up the families, breaking up communities. You know, not so much in the north of England, but in the south, community doesn't exist. And I'm from the south. So, EU, let me ask another question. Who makes the laws in the UK?
The bureaucrats.
Okay. See, we're not sure, are we really? We're not sure. Okay, well, the 1972 European Communities Act actually gave EU legislation supremacy over UK legislation. Who makes the EU laws? Israel. Yeah, good answer.
Oh, that's a bit rude to say.
Who makes EU laws? Yeah, the commissioners. The commissioners. Unelected commissioners. But in reality, it's not even the commissioners. Because what happens is that the corporatocracy knows who to lobby, i.e. who are the powerful bureaucrats. Who are the powerful bureaucrats who have got the right ears to be able to get legislation initiated by the Commission? How much of a role does the European Parliament have in the making of EU legislation? Exactly. A big, fat zero. And you wouldn't believe the number of debates and arguments that I got into over the last few weeks on this issue, where people say, no. Once the Commission initiates the legislation, it has to be passed through the European Parliament. No, it doesn't. It doesn't at all. In fact, the European Parliament is purely a consultative body. It's up to the researchers of each of the MEPs to find out what legislation is coming down the pipe. And then if there's something there that might be of interest, to try and get a debate in the European Parliament, which is totally meaningless. It's just a talking shop. A shop steward in a company has more input in the running of that company than an MEP does in anything that goes on in Brussels. It's just a charade to keep the masses thinking that there is some democratic process. There isn't. I mean, that's the simple form of the structure. That's the more complicated form. The bottom line is, it's not meant to be understood. It's not meant to be. You know, it's just meant to be a morass. And what happens is the legislation that comes out of Brussels comes out of treaties, regulation and directive. And the bottom line is that every single piece of legislation that goes onto the UK statute books is effectively coming on because of a treaty, regulation or directive. And in fact, the EU is so adept at pumping out legislation, 122,000 pieces of legislation since 1957, that we don't have enough civil servants in this country to rubber stamp them into law. So we've still got 90,000 pieces of EU legislation which haven't yet made it to the UK statute books. That doesn't mean to say it's not law, because the fact that Parliament can't, or our civil servants can't put those laws into the statute books quick enough wouldn't stand up in any court. So the fact that they're not on the books doesn't really matter at all, because in reality the UK statutes are just again a total charade, because the real legislation comes from here and has done since 1972. Now, back in 2008, I produced a presentation on Codex Alimentarius. Anyone know what Codex Alimentarius is? Yeah, the Global Food Code. It's online, so you can see that presentation. But in that presentation, I made the observation that the strategy was to establish trade blocs around the world. So you've got the European Union, the Asia Pacific Union, the South American Union, and then, of course, the North American Union, which was going to be the next step beyond NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. Now, they're behind schedule with establishing the North American Agreement, but they're looking to accelerate it. That's why, basically, Hillary's saying, just open the borders. Open the border, and Obama is saying, open the borders, just let all the Mexicans just come into the US. Because they want to basically establish homogeneity. They would destroy the natural homogeneity, although in the US that's a little bit of a moot point. But they want to literally destroy the natural homogeneity and create the... and listen carefully, I'm saying it's the mongroloid. It's not my word, I'll show you whose word it is. The mongroloid race, the mixed race. But what's coming next is TTIP, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. And this is being brought about by the lobbyists, the corporate lobby groups, to introduce a raft of legislation that will give the corporations supremacy over EU law.
Over government as well.
Oh, totally.
Over
everything.
sovereign government.
So corporate law will have absolute, total supremacy. And they're looking to introduce 3 trade agreements in the short term. That's TTIP, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, CETA, which is the Canadian-European Union trading agreement, and over the other side of the world, TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And the TTIP discussions have been going on for some time, yet MEPs are not allowed to see the documentation. And after the break, I'm going to show you a short video of an Irish MEP who tried to get access to see the TTIP documents. And once you've seen this very short video, once you've seen this video, I challenge anyone to tell me that there's anything democratic about the way in which the EU operates. So, why do we see this most of the week? Because frankly, they've got bugger all to do. There is nothing for our MPs to do. So the reason that you see a few here in Parliament is to maintain the charade. So they have a rota. So they're expected to turn up. I mean, you've got 650 odd MPs. How many can you see here?
12.
Yeah. So on any given day, there's maybe 2% of our elected representatives actually sitting in the chamber doing nothing except talking shite. And it goes into Hansard, which nobody reads. But that's it. And it's to create the charade of democratic process. In most cases, all they're doing is having a bullshit debate, just like that occurs in the European Parliament, just to create the impression that there is some due process at work here. So this is the normal chamber, but then of course once every week... Yeah, know when that is? 12 o'clock on Wednesday. 12 noon on Wednesday. And why is it packed out? Because it's on telly, exactly. And these guys know, although you can watch live transmissions from Parliament, I mean, you know, you've got to be on the brink of death. In fact, you've got to be dead. I'll tell you what, it makes watching paint dry seem like an action movie. So they know nobody watches the live broadcasts, except the relatives of those who are speaking, probably. You know, I'll be speaking sometime this afternoon. Yeah. But they know that most of the news outlets are going to broadcast a few snippets from Prime Minister's questions. And also, believe it or not, there is a massive pecking order as to who sits behind the Prime Minister and who sits behind Jeremy Corbyn, because they're going to be on camera. So that's considered like to be an absolute accolade to be chosen to be sat behind here. But the MPs themselves actually have a name for it. It's called parliamentary meat. That's meat spelled M-E-A-T. Because that's all they're there for. They're not there to participate, they are simply there to make up the numbers. And new MPs will tell you that, you know, finding out what you're supposed to do as an MP is very difficult. And the whips just say, you know, don't worry, you get your opportunity, but when you're called, you go through, you know, either that division or that division. You just follow, you're not allowed to think. You're not allowed to think, you follow the party whip. Again, no democracy. You know, it's just the party whip. So this is where we're at. That's after 43 years, 44 years of membership of the EU. In fact, I have got a slide here which just shows the supremacy of EU law from the European Communities Act of 1972. But there's another aspect to this that's really, really important. And I'm going to focus on this, we'll take a break in a second, and then I'm going to focus on this in the second half of the presentation. Because if anybody thinks that mass immigration is a humanitarian policy, then you'd be very much mistaken. If you think there's anything humanitarian underlying the refugee immigrant crisis, then basically I need to pull the scales away from your eyes. Now, I completely understand why it is that many of these people, and as you can see, the vast majority of these people are from sub-Saharan Africa. So not from the Middle East. And I mean, that's just one picture, but you know, a lot of the immigrants coming into Europe are from sub-Saharan Africa. And what we're facing in the UK is no different than what's being faced in mainland Europe. But this is an agenda. And this agenda is 94 years old. It's an agenda from 1922, which has been embraced as fundamental EU policy and philosophy, and there is actually an award given every 2 years to the European politician that is perceived to have done the most to destroy national homogeneity. And those who are aware of this, of course, if they have to be very careful how they share it, because otherwise they're immediately accused of being xenophobic or a racist. And my point is, you know, this country is multicultural. It has been multicultural pretty much, certainly since the Second World War. And there's no issue with multiculturalism. But this isn't about multiculturalism. This is fundamentally about the destruction of national homogeneity. And this is what we will be voting for if we vote to remain in the EU on Thursday. But as we've said, it's already been decided, isn't it?
Just on that point, that particular award has been awarded to people like Kissinger as well, not just European presidents or European parliamentarians, but been awarded to sort of some world figures who are equally divisive sort of characters.
Yeah.
Is it Austrian Count, was it, or a Baron or something?
Yeah, I'll talk about it in the second half. Yes, it's Count Coudenhove-Kalergi, Count Richard Coudenhove-Kalergi, yes.
Just to ask one question. Why would the Murdoch press be pushing for leave?
Pushing for leave?
For leave Brexit. Why would the Murdoch press be pushing for leave?
Well, that's a very interesting question, because then you actually have to say, well, what is Israel's agenda? And Israel's agenda is that if the UK leaves the EU, then Israel will have much greater influence over the UK and, of course, over America, which it already has. So the UK and Israel and the US
Or Marduk, as he's sometimes
yeah, would form this Zionist union. So, I mean, you're right, because Murdoch says, well, but actually, there's another reason, and I'll take this quote direct from Murdoch, because he said, one of the reasons I want out is because when I walk into Downing Street, then everyone says, what do you need? When I walk into Brussels, everyone tells me, oh, because they don't know who I am. And he said, so of course, I want to be able to wield my power in the UK.
Well, you would have thought he would be a Remain man, wouldn't you?
No.
No, okay.
No. Okay, should we take a break?
Yeah, let's say thank you very much.
Okay, now, I'm not just going to focus on immigration here, okay, because the immigration is inextricably linked in with the economy. Inextricably. And from positive angles and from negative angles. But let me just do another straw poll here. How many people here know someone who is earning minimum wage or less? Okay, so that's at least, what, 40% of the audience? You know someone who's earning minimum wage or less. Okay, next question. How many people here know someone who is on a 0 hours contract? Okay, now depending on where I am in the country, that ranges, that's actually quite a low percentage. But once I get further north and I get around the M62, either side of the Pennines, then it's a much higher percentage. But now there's a new abomination that's been introduced, a new abomination, because the government doesn't like people talking about 0 hours contracts. Because they have a statistic that says 0 hours contracts, they have a statistic that says minimum wage. So, first of all, they encourage employers to offer a penny or 2 pennies more than minimum wage so that it doesn't have to be reported as minimum wage. Why do they do that? Because they can. They can. You know, and it helps them with their reporting statistics. But the new abomination over minimum 0 hours contracts is an 8-hour contract. 8 hours. So it's not 0 hours, it's 8 hours. And the most outrageous I've seen is an 8 hours per month. Per month. So 2 hours a week or less on average. But it's not a 0 hours contract, so it doesn't have to be reported to the Department of Employment as a 0 hours contract. So you see how easy it is to effectively manipulate the figures. The reality is that more people are earning minimum wage in this country than ever before. More people are on 0 hours, and for 0 hours I'm going to use anything less than 16 a week. Because anything, 16 a week is effectively the break point for what is considered part-time versus full-time. So less than 16 hours a week, so in other words, the likelihood is no benefits whatsoever. No holiday pay, no sick pay, no pension accrual, no security. Why do employers do this?
Saves them money.
Yeah, but they save money. But why do they do this? Because, I can remember when I left college, there was, first of all, there was no possibility of me not being able to find work. The only thing I had to decide was how many job applications I could actually be asked to write. And then once I'd written the job applications and the invitations to interview came in, because I was breathing, so therefore the likelihood is that I was going to get an invitation to interview, because unemployment was pretty much non-existent. So the only decision I had to make was which of those invitations I accepted. And throughout my entire career, which of course ended in 2000, in the corporate world, but throughout my entire career, from the time I left college to the time I effectively stepped out of the corporate world, I only ever attended 4 interviews. And I know people that have attended 100+ interviews today, and they're not going to get a job probably in the next 100 either. But why are they doing this? Because of labour supply. Because they can. And the reality is that what we are going to see in the coming years is more automation, which of course automation gets rid of the lower skilled jobs. So what we're going to find is that there's going to be even more people at the lower end of the skill chain that are looking for work, and as the benefits become more and more difficult or impossible to get, then the employers are going to find more and more creative ways of paying less and less and less. And the reason they do this is because of labour supply. You know, back in the 1970s, the labour supply wasn't there. You know, we had a buoyant manufacturing industry in this country, and basically the limit of this country's ability to produce was to some extent limited by the availability of labour, and particularly skilled labour. So this country has always had people from overseas, people that have had the necessary skills or experience to contribute to the economy of this country. I spent many of my years in the corporate world overseas for the same reason, that I had the knowledge, the skills, whatever, that that country needed at that particular time. So it was a sort of mutual arrangement. But there has been a deliberate policy to bring this out of hand. Anybody recognise this guy on the screen here? No. Peter Sutherland, it is indeed. Peter Sutherland. Peter Sutherland, very interesting character. I mean, I'm just going to show you some of his connectivity here. This is just some of it. He was the youngest ever Attorney General in the Irish government. That was when he got into politics. After that, he was given the role of European Commissioner, one of the youngest European Commissioners ever to be appointed. After that, where did he go? He went to the GATT talks. He headed up the agreement on trade, general agreement on trade tariffs. His success in that role led him to becoming the founding Director General of the World Trade Organization in 1994. After that, oh, this is going to really bug me. Keep disappearing. So after that, yeah, World Trade Organization, and then he became, and he still is, chairman of Goldman Sachs International. He's former chairman of BP. I mean, it goes on and on and on. He's a founding member of the Trilateral Commission in Europe, so reporting directly to Zbigniew Brzezinski, who of course works directly for the Rockefellers. So you can see this guy is extremely well connected. Now, he gave an interview to the BBC exactly 4 years ago today, exactly, on June the 21st, 2012. And in that interview, and he gave that interview to the BBC after having given a presentation to the House of Lords. And in that interview with the BBC, he said the EU should do its best to undermine the homogeneity of its member states. And he said that in his capacity as the United Nations Special Representative for Migration. Peter Sutherland told peers the future prosperity of many EU states depended on them becoming multicultural. He also suggested the UK government's immigration policy had no basis in international law. Peter Sutherland's philosophy, which comes directly from the guy we were talking about before the break, Count Coudenhove-Kalergi, is that there should be no national identity whatsoever.
Coffee-coloured people.
Multicoloured people, exactly. You know, multiracial. Sarkozy, just before he lost the presidency, he gave a speech in France and he stated that it was every Frenchman's responsibility to marry interracially. And he said, and if people don't do it voluntarily, then we will find ways to incentivise interracial marriage. Meanwhile, of course, the traditional aristocracy and the spiritual elite, that's the term used by Coudenhove-Kalergi, protect their purity, their bloodline purity, to an nth degree. An nth degree. There's actually a team of people in Israel who are tasked with making sure that the Jewish population maintains its racial purity. And if they hear of somebody in the US or in the UK who is intending to marry a Gentile, then this team goes across and does their level best to dissuade them from doing it. This is the incentive that these people have. This is one of his quotes. He said, "We still nurse a sense of our homogeneity and difference from others. And that's precisely what the European Union, in my view, should be doing its best to undermine." In other words, basically what they want to do is destroy culture. You know, I mean, I've lived in France, I've lived in the Netherlands, I've lived in the Middle East, I've lived in the United States, in Texas, and every one of these areas, you know, it's a different culture. In fact, in the States, you know, I've travelled around a lot, and there's different cultures between the states. You know, and some, I mean, I loved it because it was so different. You know, in the Middle East, I was based in Dubai, but I had responsibility for everything between Egypt in the southeast and Iran in the southwest and Iran in the northeast. And you know, I loved going to these places, the different cultures, the difference between Cairo and Damascus and Tehran. You know, I loved it. And in the UK, you know, the difference, and it still exists to some extent, but the difference between the south, the southwest, and you know, coming up into the north or going up into Scotland, you know, these regional cultures, it's part of the richness of society. And yet this philosophy is all about destroying those cultures. Peter Mandelson, remember him? Prince of Darkness. This is what he said in an interview. He said, immigrants, he said, we sent out search parties to get them to come to Britain and made it hard for Britons to get work. I mean, this isn't a conspiracy. This is what, well, it is a conspiracy, but it's not a theory, because it's factual. Because this is what these guys have been very open about doing. And the reason that they're so open about it is because in their perverse belief system, the more they tell us about what they're planning to do, if we don't react against it, then they take that as a mandate to pursue that agenda. And that's exactly what's happening right here, right now, this coming Thursday. What these guys are doing is furthering the Pan-European Manifesto, which was drafted by Count Coudenhove-Kalergi after the First World War. And he published a book called the Pan-European Manifesto. And let me quote from an analysis of the book, The Kalergi Plan. In the subsequent book, Practical Idealism, Kalergi declared that the people of the future, the United States of Europe, will not be the original peoples of the old continent, but a kind of, and this is his words, but a kind of bestial subhuman made by miscegenation. Kalergi stated in no uncertain terms that you must cross the peoples of Europe with Asian races and colour to create a multi-ethnic flock without quality and easily controllable by the ruling elite. Now that's an absurd statement, of course, and it reflects the mentality of that time. And of course there's always going to be interracial marriage. I mean, again, that's part of the richness of a multicultural society. And this isn't to undermine any of that. But this goes way, way, way beyond that. It's the total destruction of all culture. That analysis continues. I hate that word. The parasites, it should be. The parasites will first eliminate democracy, the rule of the people. Next, the parasites will eliminate the people via miscegenation, thereby replacing the white race with an easily controllable mestizo race. Now, when they say easily controllable, it's not suggesting for one moment that these people are not interested. The reality is that when you live in a country that's not your own, you tend to take less interest in what's going on. You know, when I was living in these foreign countries, you know, I would be an observer. I was a guest in those countries. So I would be an observer. You know, there was certainly stuff going on in the Middle East that you know, I certainly didn't like. But, you know, I had a choice. I stayed or left. And of course, ultimately, I did leave. But I stayed because I wanted to experience that culture. But here what he's saying is that if you mix the people up enough, then basically they have no identity, they have no attachment. And so they're easily manipulable. By abolishing the principle of equality of all before the law, avoiding and punishing any criticism of minorities and protecting the minorities with special laws, the masses are suppressed. So this is political correctness. This is basically what is being initiated here with this attack on anybody who wants to vote Leave being labelled as xenophobic racist. This is how debate is shut down, by using aggressive terminology and literally conditioning people. I mean, I said to somebody the other day, somebody who, fortunately, I know well, I consider a friend, and I just said, listen to yourself. Listen to yourself. It's not you. You've been conditioned. You are simply regurgitating the vocabulary that you've heard the extremists pump out in the media. It's not you. You're being conditioned. Get back into your true self. They know that they can do this. They've been doing it for a long time. This is the guy, founder and president of the Pan-European Union, the original EU. And it was 1925 when he wrote Practical Idealism. And this is a quote from the book. He said, "The man of the future will be mixed race. The Eurasian Negroid race of the future will replace the diversity of peoples. Russian Bolshevism constitutes a decisive step towards this purpose, where a small group of communist spiritual aristocrats," you know what he's talking about there? Yeah. Ashkenazi, exactly, "govern the country. The general staff of both are recruited from Europe's spiritual leader race, the Jews." This is his mentality in the 1920s. From the European quantity people, the mass to quality races rise up. Blood aristocracy and Jewry. So if you're not part of the aristocracy, or you're not part, or you don't have the... drop your trousers, guys, let's see who's... If you're not part of the Ashkenazi bloodline, then basically you are a subhuman. Or as they refer to us as the Goy, the Goyim. Now, fortunately, not all of the Ashkenazi believe that or subscribe to that philosophy. And there is a group of Orthodox Jews called Neturei Karta who are doing everything they possibly can to undermine this, because they find it as abhorrent as we do. Both believe in their higher mission. How arrogant is this? Both believe in their higher mission of their better blood. The superiority of their spirit predestines them to become a main factor of the future nobility. Now then, in 1950, Truthjuice was awarded the very first Charlemagne Prize. Subsequent winners have included Winston Churchill, Edward Heath, Bill Clinton, Henry Kissinger and Tony Blair. Of mixed race himself, he was married 3 times, 2 of his wives were Jewish. The Charlemagne Prize. The Charlemagne Prize is what has effectively morphed into the Truthjuice Award. Here's a picture, by the way. This is Neturei Karta. Very vocal in the US. Extremely vocal. Not so much here, but Neturei Karta, this group of Orthodox Jews, they actually believe that there should not be a state of Israel. They actually believe that the state of Israel was taken from them, and that their work is to be spread around the world and to live in and amongst the nations of the world, not to have their own nation state. So this is the guy, this is effectively one of the primary and fundamental policies and philosophies of the EU, and has always been. And what's happened over the last few years is that likes of Peter Mandelson and Peter Sutherland have been out there sharing it. So, the EU, Tony Blair. What has the EU done? And when I say the EU, remember, we were part of it. We are part of it. but the EU has done a pretty damn good job of destruction. That's Lebanon. That's Libya. This is Dubai. This is the part of Dubai that everybody sees. This is the part you don't. Let me tell you, this is a lot better than when I lived there. When I lived there, the third country nationals, they lived in wooden shanty towns in the desert. And one of the concerns I had was that whenever a contract was finished, it was remarkable how often these shanty towns used to catch fire with phenomenal loss of life. Which of course meant that the contractors didn't have to pay for the flights home, and in a lot of cases just didn't pay them. So now at least they have slightly more permanent accommodation, but nothing like the expat community have there. They're not part of the elite, they're part of the underclass. This is Jerry, I love his name, Gerrymander. He said the role of organisation is to, the role of globalisation is to homogenise all cultures and to turn them into commodified markets. This is global corporatism, and therefore to make them easier for global corporations to control. TTIP, TPP, CETA. Global corporations are even now trying to commodify all remaining aspects of national cultures, not to mention the indigenous cultures. So there it is, it's spelled out in words of one syllable. The Coudenhove Kalergi Award went to Angela Merkel in 2010. In 2012 it went to Van Rompuy. This guy got it a few years earlier. This war criminal. Yeah. The Chilcot inquiry, of course, is due to be released in the immediate aftermath of the EU referendum. And the whole idea is to take the heat away from the debate about the EU referendum. It's all carefully timed. Here's some of the quotes from Sutherland. Migrants are good for a community economically and in every other way. They contribute positively. And of course, that's true. That's true. A lot of the current immigration population do. Because, they've integrated into the communities where they've taken up residence. But this isn't about multiculturalism, this is about cultural destruction. Yeah. It's the next level. This is the latest recipient of the Kalergi Award, Jean-Claude Juncker. He said the EU migrants crisis plan takes shape. According to officials briefed on the plan, Mr Juncker is vowing to be ambitious, challenging reluctant political leaders to shelter tens of thousands more migrants than have previously been agreed. Let me tell you what's going on. All of the housing associations have been instructed to vacate as many two-bedroom properties as is possible. There are currently, and that's where the bedroom tax, of course, came in. That was part of driving that agenda. So right now, there are more empty two-bedroom social housing properties than there are homeless in this country. And those properties are being reserved for the next wave of immigrants. The local authorities have been instructed to keep these properties vacant until this next wave comes in. And of course, after Thursday, people think this is a straight in-out vote. Well, if it was an out vote, it would only be a little bit out, and it would still take 2 years at least to negotiate all the terms of a full extraction. The vote in is going to be taken as that's it, you're in. You're in. And sadly, I am going to predict that within 20 years, probably less, but within 20 years, there will be massive civil unrest in this country. Unfortunately, there's a degree of inevitability about this. Because what our generation, have effectively done is allowed this country to, and it's not just in this country, it's right across Europe, it's also elsewhere in the world, but we've allowed ourselves to be manipulated by this malicious and pernicious globalist agenda, where you're either fortunate enough to get onto the payroll and develop the skills that will further their profitability and enable the corporate parasites at the top of the organisation to be earning their outrageous multi-million dollar packages, whilst everybody else is on minimum wage or 0 hours contracts. Coupled with which, I don't expect to be at liberty for too long after Thursday, because what's coming down the pipe is the counter-extremism bill. I am already flagged as a domestic extremist because of the work that I've done on raising awareness around the country of the unconventional gas, the fracking agenda. Which is why I was stopped by Special Branch at Exeter Airport on the week before Christmas. The guys who stopped me clearly had no idea why they'd stopped me, but they'd been told to stop me. So, you know, the intimidation starts to be ramped up about against anyone who has the audacity to put their head above the parapet. And then, of course, just a few weeks ago, Rathlin Energy succeeded after I gave them the runaround for 21 months, but they succeeded in bankrupting me. Which, you know, was basically, I knew that was eventually going to happen, but my attitude was, well, good luck with that, guys, because I've got nothing. So, I live in a caravan, I have no fixed address, I spend my time really travelling around the country, working with communities, you know, trying to help communities build up their local resistance. Initially, obviously, against unconventional gas, but eventually it's going to be more than that. Communities have been deliberately destroyed in this country, and in many other countries, because the establishment, the global corporatists know that if they can keep people divided, they're much easier to control. But the anti-fracking community has found a middle path there. Because over the last 4 years, we have built up a network of over 1,000 anti-fracking groups around this country. There's no national organisation. There are some people who'd like to see one, but we managed to stop that happening. We have over 1,000 groups. Each of these groups is completely independent and autonomous. Sure, of course, they network, they use social media to network. In some of the communities, like in North and East Yorkshire, where the average age of the community is well into the 70s, or the active community is well into the 70s, then they don't use social media. Do you know what? They actually meet in person. Imagine that. Imagine that. They actually meet down in town when they're having a coffee or in the market, which is how the French farmers meet. Communities are going to be incredibly important. The French realise this. This is why the French farmers meet in the marketplace, and they meet with other activists in the marketplace. How many people here are aware that France has been experiencing massive civil disobedience for almost 3 months now? Okay, well, obviously we've got an aware audience, but still only about 50% put their hand up there. Yeah, the only time that France isn't getting, it's not getting any coverage in the media is when it involves British football fans. Yet, it's going on in every city. There's a friend of mine who lives in France, and he said that basically the weather was being deliberately manipulated to bring about biblical rainstorms to stop the people from coming out on the streets. Because there wasn't enough water cannon to shut them down, so they just made it rain. Unbelievable. But what's coming down the bill, down the pipe, is the counter-extremism bill, which will soon be the Counter-Extremism Act, and this will give the British government the opportunity to label anyone who challenges their agenda the label of extremist. It's intimidatory. It's intimidatory. But the community that is least intimidated actually are the retirees. Because the retirees, in a lot of cases, this is the last generation of retirees. Quite possibly that's it, the last generation of retirees. Yeah, because everyone else is going to have to work till they drop. But this generation of retirees, they're financially independent, they're time independent, and they don't have to worry about a court record if they get arrested. So actually, those areas where we've got groups of retirees. They call themselves the geriactivists, by the way. Geriactivists. But you know, they were absolutely instrumental in shutting down Rathline Energy in East Yorkshire. This is this EU artwork that has been used in Ireland, the Netherlands and France. I mean, this is a whole presentation in of itself. Even the stars here, this is the geometry of Baphomet. Baphomet. Same geometry as was used in the Uncle Sam posters. And this is Uncle Sam. If you look at Uncle Sam and the geometry of Uncle Sam, then the hat, of course, covers this, but this is the beard and the hair. What is this? Tower of Babel. Why do we think it's Tower of Babel?
It looks like if one of the Bibles has got an imaginary sketch, it sort of reminds us of something.
Yeah, it's Bruegel.
Some artists had.
Yeah. It's Bruegel's artwork. It was his vision of the Tower of Babel, and so that is now the image that we have of the tower. But if there was any doubt whatsoever that the EU is following a Babylonian philosophy, then that should put it to rest, because this is the parliamentary building at Strasbourg. And by the way, the BBC building in the Aldwych has a similar design. Less pronounced, but nonetheless it's still loosely based on Bruegel's artwork. So the Tower of Babel represents the home of those who believe themselves to be the rightful rulers of a planetary fiefdom. The Committee of 300, as Dr. John Coleman identified them. And if you want to take a look at the global structure, then I would recommend Dr. Coleman's book, say Committee of 300. He actually wrote the first draft in 1986. Now that was published on hard research. That's before the days of any kind of internet. It was just hard research. And then he republished it 20 years later in 2006. And if you get a copy, get the 2006 version, because you know, he corrected obviously a lot of the stuff.
You can get it on the internet free of charge on archive.org.
Archive.org, there you go. But do make sure that you're reading the 2006 version,
The fourth edition.
because that is certainly the updated one. So the Committee of 300, and even Dr. Coleman says that within the Committee of 300 there's an inner sanctum who call themselves the Olympians. And he makes a stab at who the families might be that make up those 13 Olympians. And he comes up with the obvious ones like the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, the Saxe-Coburg-Goethers, the Warburgs, the DuPonts, the Schieffs. But it's a stab, it's a best guess. But even then he says that once you know the family, you still don't know who within the family is either the patriarch or the matriarch within that family. But they don't do anything. They will never dirty their hands. They will never sully themselves. They always get others to do it. And here what you see is the two guys in the grey suits looking longingly across the moat here. And of course this is another depiction of the separated capstone, where the Tower of Babel represents the separated capstone and the moat represents the separation. And these guys here, who are these guys? These are the people whose names you know. You know, this is the Bushes, the Cheneys, the Rumsfelds, the Clintons, the Blairs, the Camerons, the Boris Johnsons. These are all the people who will literally do whatever it takes. They'll sell their soul, they'll stick their dick in a pig, whatever it takes. Whatever it takes to be able to... I'll take questions on that. Whatever it takes to actually climb up the greasy pole. You know, will they kill their firstborn? Well, Gordon Brown and David Cameron.
Absolutely.
You know, maybe coincidence? Mm-hmm. But the reality is they will never get in. Never. And actually, you know what? It's my perception that those who are inside have nothing but contempt for these individuals. Yeah, because they know they've prostituted themselves. They've prostituted their humanity in return for the trinkets, the titles, the apparent power. But they've sold their soul. And the souls of anybody who comes into contact with them. And then we have humanity. Well, let me just go back, because there's no polite word for these people in the English language, but there was a word in Germany in the time of the ghettos, Kapo. It's short for Camp Polizei. And in the ghettos, in the Jewish ghettos, the Germans used to demand that the civil leaders within the ghetto, the ones who were responsible for the allocation of housing, of distribution of food, and producing the lists of the people to be shipped out to the camps. But when the last truck shipped out, what happened to these guys? They were on the last truck out, exactly. Exactly. So they fulfilled a role, thinking that they were currying favour, but ultimately it's like, discarded. So then we have humanity. And can you see how humanity is depicted here?
In course, houses of
Blockheads. Blockheads, exactly, except one, the baby. And what this artwork depicts is the knowledge. They know that every life form, every human life form that enters into this physical realm does so with the potential to achieve the full range of their human capabilities and capacities, which go way beyond what is accepted in science. Go way beyond the left brain capabilities and capacity. The left brain is locked into this physical realm. The left brain is a transmitter-receiver within the frequencies of this three-dimensional physical realm. The right brain, the heart, connect, has the capacity to connect with everything. Everything that's out there, in any way, shape or form. And these guys know that. And do you know what? I don't believe they have that capacity. And they know they don't have that capacity. And they want to make sure that no human wakes up to the realisation that they have that capacity. So what do? Shut it down. From the get-go. How do they do that?
Fluoride.
Vaccines, fluoride, geoengineering, GM foods, the schools, they're dumbing down on the schools. It's a multi-pronged attack. The EMF, the Wi-Fi. You know, why do you think Wi-Fi is banned in schools in France? Because, you know, the French are still thinking. They're still capable of thinking. France has banned fluoride in the water. They banned fracking. You know, the French still have some capacity for realising what's occurring. This is a piece of artwork from Brick Lane 4 years ago, 2012. And it's a wonderful depiction. Here we have, you know, the globalist bankers playing their game of Monopoly on the backs of humanity. And basically this is their game. It's asset stripping. It's asset stripping. And they started this a long time ago. They accelerated the game in 1666 when they introduced the Sestui-Kivi Act. So that's a whole other story. But their whole purpose is to literally asset strip the world. Asset strip the world. They've done a really good job on Greece, on Portugal, on Spain, on Italy, on Ireland. France isn't in great shape. And this is the EU. And yet we still think it's a good idea to remain part of this club that wants to asset strip us. This is how brilliant the deception is. It's in our face, it's there for everybody to see, but people say, yeah, I still want to be a member of that club. You know, but I've got some Vaseline in the car. If anybody wants some, you know, come see me. Because that's what you're going to need after Thursday. We're all going to, well, no, I'm going to keep it because I'm going to need it more than you. Because this is going to get very nasty after Thursday. Once the result is announced that we are remaining in, then they are going to go for broke. And the argument's going to be, well, you voted in, you wanted to stay in, for 43 years we let you test the waters, we let you see what it's like, and we haven't hidden anything. You can see that we've destroyed these other countries, you can see what we've done to your national industries, we've privatised them, you know, they're a shadow of what they were, You can see what we've done to your healthcare service. You know what we're doing. The whole goal is to privatise it. Richard Branson says, yeah, we've got to stay in. Well, I'm not surprised. He just picked up a £200 million contract to manage the healthcare service, I think, in Kent. Privatisation. Asset stripping. Nothing left. This is the public debt. Who the fuck do we owe it to? Who do we owe it to?
Private banks.
Yeah, the private banks. And what has happened is the European Central Bank has bought up all the debt from all these countries, like Greece and Spain and Portugal and Italy and Ireland. It's bought up all the debt, so the European Central Bank owns these countries. That's why they put in their own people to effectively manage these countries. In Italy, they made no secret about it. They put in Roberto Monti. Berlusconi might have a few skeletons in the cupboard, not literally necessarily, but he might have a few skeletons, but basically he was very popular in Italy, and the bankers said, yeah, you're gone, we're putting Roberto Monti in your place. No election, but he's your new Prime Minister. They did the same in Greece. Of course, Greece had a referendum as to whether to accept the austerity budget, and it was a resounding no, but the EU said, well, thanks for letting us know what you think, but we don't care, because you're going to get it anyway. This is what's happening. The US military is not a US military, it is the private militia of the global corporations. And won't retire anybody that doesn't buy into them. They're going for Syria right now, primarily because Assad doesn't want to play ball with running a pipeline across from Qatar and Saudi Arabia. Assad wants to run a pipeline for Iran. So they're going to destroy his country to get the pipeline in there. It's just a matter of time. And then eventually they'll go for Iran. And Hillary Clinton, that's going to be one of her primary objectives once she's in the White House, is to take down Iran. A country that hasn't attacked anybody for a couple of millennia, and certainly has no designs on attacking the US, but Hillary Clinton will bring it down on behalf of the global corporations. So, you know what the deal is. Very simple. You're not allowed to think, but you've got to be contributing towards the global corporatocracy. And, you've got to be prepared for your kids to be living with you and your grandkids to be living with you, because future generations won't be able to afford property, or a vast majority of them won't be able to afford property. So it's going to become like Cairo. When I first went to Cairo, I thought, why don't they ever put roofs on the house? Until it was explained to me that you never put a roof on the house in Cairo, because eventually, when your kids marry, then you build another floor. And the kids, the youngest generation lives at the top, the middle generation lives on the next level, and then the older generation lives on the ground floor. So if you see a 4-storey house, you know exactly how many generations are living in that property. It's going to be like that in the UK. Coupled with which, of course, you see kids. Sorry guys, I'm sure it doesn't apply to you. But, you see kids. I saw a group of them walking down the street. Not one of them was in conversation. They're all doing this. Probably texting each other. Yeah. They're living their lives in the electronics. Books are being destroyed. It's not Fahrenheit 451. Why do you think it's called a Kindle? A Kindle. After Thursday, the agenda is going to be accelerated on a massive scale. They do not want independent thinkers. They want drones. People who are literally going to do the yes sir, no sir, 3 bags full sir. When I see bailiffs breaking into the home of an 82-year-old woman, whatever happened to their humanity? Whatever happened to their fundamental compassion? These are the basics of what it is to be human. Love and compassion, cooperation, the ability to help the person that's struggling. Because, we know damn well that what goes around comes around, and, we help people now, and we might just need their support and help in the future. No? Not now. You see that somebody's down? Kick them. Obviously no good, obviously not contributing to society, obviously not contributing to the corporatocracy. If they haven't got a pay packet, why should I help them? This is the mentality. And I never saw this as a kid. In fact, I left the UK in the late 1980s, and I don't remember seeing this when I left the UK in the 80s. When I came back to the UK, I mean I visited, but when I came back to live here in 2001, then, you know, that was when I first started to notice this. We got the GM foods, we got the fracking, we got the fluoride, we got the financial system, and they're able to get away with this shit because everyone has been so dumbed down that nobody's interested in participating in the political process. And why is that? Because we have effectively allowed ourselves to be dumbed down. We have effectively abdicated from any participation. We got high on the hog, we got fat. You know, when Harold Macmillan in 1958 told the population of this country, you've never had it so good, he may well have known something. He may well have known something. Because, you know, in the post-war years, right through to the Maggie years, which was the start of, obviously, the problems in many ways, but those years, you know, we had full employment. There was never ever any risk of not being able to get a home, whether it was rented or whether it was purchased. I don't own a property now, but when I did, the biggest mortgage I ever had was £80,000. Now I know of young people, couples, that have got mortgages of £250,000 and £300,000. They're slaves. They are total slaves. And unfortunately, the vast majority of people, and you know this is true, the vast majority of people are one paycheck away from being in financial difficulty. One paycheck. You know, I used to broad brush define the middle classes as those that actually had the resources to be able to survive 12 months without a paycheck. But that population is diminishing rapidly. You know, the vast majority of people today really don't have much more, you know, behind them than possibly for 1 month.
Well, a lot of it is consumerism, isn't it?
It's, oh, absolutely, the consumerism, and of course that's part of the conditioning. Part of the conditioning. I got to tell you, having nothing is wonderfully liberating. Wonderfully liberating. And by making me bankrupt, if they thought it was going to shut me down, well, you can see what effect that's had. It's made a monster out of me. You know, because basically I can challenge them now and have no risk of having costs levied against me. Send them to the official receiver. So what we've got 1%. It's actually not even 1%. It's 0.0001% of parasites who control the world. There's another 4%, like Cameron, like Boris, like Bush, like Clinton, that have sold their soul. 90% are asleep. And you know what? Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Don't waste your time, don't waste your energy or your resources in trying to get through to the 90%. Because it ain't going to happen. Because they're the ones that have drunk the Kool-Aid and ain't going to make any difference at all. 5%, no. Unfortunately, they're trying to wake up the 90%. But the 5%, if it's 5%, actually we only need to get through to another 5%. It was only 8% of the population that took up arms against the might of the British Army in the US to achieve independence. 8%. Maximum. Maximum. There was only 3% actively fighting at any given time. It's actually estimated that 90% didn't even want independence from Britain. So it was the 8% that actually brought about the change. So what we can do is sow seeds. You know, we can sow seeds and we should never stop sowing seeds. The only problem is that you never know when that seed's going to germinate. You know, when we see people saying, don't you know 9/11 was an inside job? Look, I told you, look, building 7, can't you see it? Building 7. And you go, oh God. Nutter. You know, look, the analogy is like a grow bag. You've got a seed. You put the seed in the grow bag. You give it a little bit of water. And then you kick the soil over it. You go, come on. Come on. And then you pour some more water over it. You kick some more soil over it. Oh, come on. Done. So you go back, you give it another chance, kick some more soil over it, put the water on it. You go, oh, that's no good. But what have you done? You've killed the seed. You've killed it. You've got to plant the seed, give it a little bit of water, and walk away. Just walk away from it. You don't know when that seed is going to germinate. You don't know whether it's the next day, the next week, the next month, the next year, or the next decade, but you still planted that seed. The challenge, of course, is if you do happen to be there when the seed does sprout, and that person comes back to you and goes, did you realise 9/11 was an inside job? Your challenge is not to go, he told you that 10 years ago. You know, your challenge is to go, really? And what else have you discovered? You know, nurture curiosity. Because things only become a truth when we realise it for ourselves. You know, you can be told stuff until you're blue in the face, but until you realise it for yourself, it's not a truth. It's not your truth. Now, there's no question that there's a lot of seeds that have been sown and are being sown, and a lot of those seeds are germinating. So even though the post-referendum UK is not going to be particularly pretty, we can still bring about the changes that we know we need to see. But we've got to get involved. We absolutely have to get involved. And we know that what's going to happen is they're going to do everything they possibly can to stop us trying to sow those seeds. That's what the Domestic Extremism Act is going to be all about. But you know, ultimately there's way more of us than there is of them. And we don't need a hierarchy. We don't need a structure. We just need people to go do whatever it is that you feel you can do. Get involved in whatever it is that, you know, pushes your buttons. But get involved in something. Because that's what these socio-psychopathic parasites rely on. They absolutely rely on our apathy. They rely on us doing nothing. Because that way, they don't care why we don't do anything. They don't care why we don't vote. They'd rather we didn't vote. Because if we don't vote, then that's a mandate for them to just do whatever it is that they were going to do. We know they're going to manipulate the vote anyway, but let's not make it easy for them. But post-referendum, it's not all over. It's going to be a lot harder than if we came out of the EU, but even then, it's not going to be easy, because if we did come out of the EU, then the prognosis would be that there would be a game plan to deliberately destroy the country. So that within 10 years, they have the population gagging to be allowed back in. But both scenarios rely on us not getting involved. So if we don't get involved, then the prognosis really isn't very pretty. And we are going to be condemning future generations to lives of absolute abject economic slavery or misery. So it really does rest with us. And that's why groups like Truthjuice, you know, springing up across the country, and there's real change in Leeds, in Manchester, in Nottingham, in Hull. You know, all of these groups, we need many, many different groups, all operating separately, independently, autonomously, no head that can be cut off. So that, you know, they come after one person, big deal. It has no impact whatsoever in what it is that that community is trying to achieve. Does that make sense? Yeah. So ultimately, you know, obviously, look, you know, those people who've got families, that's a priority. You know, you've got to take care of your family. You've got to do what needs to be done to take care of your family. But, you know, you had the time to come here this evening. Even if you only have one evening a week to get involved in something, get involved. And then, as you know, as time goes on, maybe you'll have a bit more time. So, get off that treadmill. You know, sometimes we get kicked off the treadmill. You know, I was sort of half stepping off the treadmill, and then, you know, something came along and went, and the decision was pretty much taken for me. And you know what? I said thank you. I said thank you. Because, you know, I was like sort of just about to step off, but, you know, I enjoyed what I was doing. I was very well rewarded, but it was shallow. It was shallow. And I didn't like some of the stuff that was going on in the oil and gas industry. And so there I was sort of, you know, do I? And then bang. And I haven't looked back. 20 years ago, I had no concept of life without a salary. Now I have no concept of life with a salary. And do you know which one I prefer? Well, anyway, listen, we've got a lot of work to do, collectively. And you know, what gives me heart is that all around the country there are groups like this that are ready to get involved, to step up to the plate and to get involved. Maybe you don't know what it is you're going to get involved with yet, but it will become apparent to you over time. But if I didn't think we could bring about the changes that we all know we need to see, I wouldn't be here. So I absolutely have faith in humanity, in the fundamentals of humanity, in the love, the compassion, the cooperation to bring down these global corporatist parasites. I might not see it in my lifetime, but I'll give it my best shot while I'm still here. So thanks very much.
I'm sure I share your sentiment of the gratitude of Ian coming out and, as I say, giving us a talk, and grateful you've all come out and supported it. Shall we've got like random time for questions, so if there's any questions, I can even do this.
What is your analysis of Trump?
The man, not the gesture.
That's a very, very good question. Well, once again, I mean, I think what he's there to do is to effectively shoo Hillary in. It's looking that way. Because the media is throwing its weight behind Hillary in such a way, it's creating a perception in the US in such a way that it seems almost impossible that Trump could get a victory. So, in other words, even if he does get a majority, they will simply manipulate the vote just like they did with Bush and Gore. Probably with Bush and Kerry, you know, so they will get in their chosen candidate. You know, we had 16 years of Republican presidency, and I think we're going to get 16 years of Democrat now. But Hillary, I mean, she is the devil incarnate. I mean, she makes Peter Mandelson look saintly. So, you know, it's going to be very, very interesting. Once again, it's going to come down to us. I mean, you know, one of the ways in which I've encouraged people who are fighting fracking in Yorkshire and Lancashire is, look, join your local Conservative Party or join your local Labour Party. But, you know, infiltrate them. I mean, I know it makes you want to gag sometimes, but, you know, let's infiltrate them as they try and infiltrate us. You know, if we don't participate, we're not going to bring about the change. And I think, you know, a big problem in the US is that people don't participate. It's a very, very small percentage of people in the US who participate in national politics. And I think what people don't realise outside of the US is that each state in the US has much more autonomy than any country does in the EU. You know, in fact, the president of the US actually has very little to do with what's going on within the domestic US. So that's why we have to be very watchful about what she does on the international scene.
With all these problems, Israel is in the background, and I'm just wondering what percentage do you think is the chance of actually splitting the Jewish? Because a lot of Jews suffer from the Zionists. So
yeah, they do.
Yeah,
that's true.
Is that something that could be relied upon or worked on?
Well, it certainly worked on. I mean, Netta and Carter are a classic example. You know, Rudolf Steiner said 100 years ago that the Zionist is not the friend of the Jew. The Zionists use the Jewish people and they hide behind them. And in fact, there's a wonderful YouTube clip of Shalom Aloni, who's a former Israeli minister, and she was giving an interview on Democracy Now! And she says, you know, it's very simple. It's very simple for us to get our way. Because in America, if anybody challenges us, we simply label them as anti-Semitic. In Europe, if anybody challenges us, we just call them a Holocaust denier. And this is, you know, how they have manipulated the vocabulary to shut down opposition. But, you know, what isn't reported is that there's a lot of people in Israel, resident Jewish people in Israel, that are regularly protesting and challenging the Israeli government on their policies towards the Palestinians. So, you know, the Zionists are united, and by the way, we've got to be very careful because, you know, the likes of Michael Gove has stated categorically that, you know, he's a Zionist and, you know, he's a friend of Israel. And so there's no question that the influence of the Zionists is very, very significant. I mean, in the US, of course, it's AIPAC, the America-Israel Public Affairs Committee, and it effectively controls American politics. No American can get elected unless he's got the support of AIPAC. So yes, it's a big challenge.
One of the, obviously, throughout the presentation, you talked about obviously the sort of ruling elite and sort of the Jewish question. One of the things I was reading about recently was
Zionist question.
Zionist, sorry. One of the things I was reading about recently was the work of Walter Hallstatt, I think his name is. He was the first European president. He was a solicitor or a lawyer that worked for IG Farben, and he produced essentially what was the manifesto, I suppose, of how to rule Europe after the war, assuming the Germans.
Yes, that's right.
So that coming from that perspective, it's a bit different from the Jewish perspective, isn't it? Because obviously the Nazis were very, you know.
Yeah, but well, let's focus on the Zionists as opposed to the Jewish, because it's very much a Zionist agenda. Because I mean, we can trace it back to Theodor Herzl and the International Zionists in the late 19th century. But you're right. What they've done, what's happened, is effectively there was an initial goal, obviously, for European dominion. What's happened is the Zionists have an agenda for global dominion, and they do it through hegemony. In other words, which is control of whomever it is that's in power. So they don't necessarily need to be waving the Zionist flag. All they need to know is that the person that's actually in office is within their control. One other question, sir.
Yes, you're right about that, because they are of the synagogue of Satan. That's what it says. But if you notice that the EU, yeah, you get it, is having their election on the 23rd, yeah, which is the 23rd Psalms, yeah. So it says in there, "Thou hast prepared a table before me in the presence of my enemy." But you need to be at the negotiating table, not run away. We've conquered Europe, World War I, World War II. This is the end time. I say to Britain, get back in there at the negotiating table so that we can discuss the terms and conditions of their unconditional surrender.
That would be an absolutely outstanding proposition if there was a negotiating table. There is no negotiating table. There is no table.
Put one there.
Just you
at a table.
Yeah, it would be wonderful.
Put one.
I agree with you. It would be absolutely wonderful to be able to say, okay guys, let's sit down and talk about it. And they're not interested. There is no desire.
Then they are null and void then, aren't they?
Well, that's our point.
Yeah,
They've been null and void for 43 years, and we're still going to vote to remain. If we could negotiate, of course that would be the ideal proposition. But what we have proven, beyond any shadow of doubt, is that basically there is no negotiating table. And let me tell you that in Brussels, the British, I mean, are considered to be, you know, the lowest of the low. They're not interested in talking to the Brits. They're just not interested.
Then they're null and void.
Well,
They've lost the power.
Unfortunately, we are allowing ourselves to be subjugated to it.
That's what they call us in Europe, the crazy people who live on that island.
Yeah, exactly.
Allegedly.
Allegedly, yeah. We need to become even more crazy.
So I'm going to wrap it up now before we go like all mental shouting out of the back. As I said, I don't think anyone understands the geopolitical nature as well as Ian, and I'm grateful he's tried to explain some of it today. So I think we'll give him one more round of applause.
Search, just all you got to remember is TTIP Ming, M-I-N-G, Ming, as in Ming Dynasty. TTIP Ming, because that's the nickname that this Irish politician is known by, who tried to get in to see the TTIP documentation. So just search TTIP Ming and click on videos. You'll see his very short video of him explaining the process of him trying to see the TTIP documents. And please do watch that before you vote on Thursday.